So here's Final Fantasy III. So Final Fantasy III changed a decent amount of stuff in the Final Fantasy series, really. It was never released in America until the DS version in like the mid 2000s. The game would go on to be re-released for the PC in like 2014 or somewhere around there. So this game is really unknown in the Final Fantasy series. So here's my thoughts on it. The story in this game is extremely basic, like really basic. The game starts as you start as a group of orphans, and they get told they are the warriors of light and have to defeat evil. That's really it. It's about as basic as it sounds. You have to gather these crystals to get enough power to fight this dude who is the bane of all evil. Like, it's really generic and it's really easy to understand. To be fair though, this game came out in the NES era with really basic and nice understandable storylines. It's just nowadays we look back at this and laugh at how basic and generic it is. And that's because it is. It's boring, it really doesn't go anywhere, it takes not a single interesting turn actually, at all, and the writing is generally just okay. I could totally roast the story for being so bland and easy to understand, but again, this game came out in like the late 80s, so there's no point in roasting it. I'm just gonna say it's as boring and bland as it sounds. I mean, there's just my only comment really on this is gonna be simple story. So the gameplay of Final Fantasy III is very old school. Like, it's a really old school RPG as it came out in the late 80s. You walk around the world map, you go into towns, talk to people, and fight monsters. If you look at what is basically a textbook definition of an RPG, you'd probably see this game along with the original Dragon Quest games, as it's really old school and it's about as traditional as it gets. The game is a full-on JRPG, like classic. While walking around in the overworld, you can run into some places, interact with some people, interact with some objects. It's pretty standard, and it's because this is about as classically styled of an RPG that can be. There's random encounters, lots of them. They're pretty much random encounters everywhere, except for a select number of villages and towns. Whether you're on the overworld, whether you're in a dungeon, there's random encounters like everywhere. So I guess this brings me into the battle system. So this was before Final Fantasy's turn-based battle system still. Used a turn-based system, so you choose all the actions for your party members attack, then like you attack, and then the enemy attacks, and sometimes it's in between. You choose your next set of actions, then you attack, then the enemy attacks. It's pretty standard stuff. It continues. You can use a melee attack, you can use items, and then you can use whatever special skill your job has. Jobs would become a huge part of the Final Fantasy series after this. And this is the game that really introduced it. Basically, it's classes. Role-playing. Each character gets assigned a job, and you can do this yourself. Like, you assign the classes yourself. There's like 20-ish jobs in the game. You assign them a job, and then they can do a certain action that only that job can do. You level up this job along with your regular level. So whenever you defeat an enemy, you gain experience points, and experience goes into leveling up your character as well as the job's level. The higher the level, the job, the better the skills will be, and the stronger they will be. These jobs are about as vanilla as they get. I mean, we're talking the basics. This was the first game to have jobs. Like, it's going to be basic. We're talking warrior, thief, mage, knight, etc. It's really bare bones, and it's just as bare bones as it gets. But again, this makes sense. It was the first time doing it, so it makes a lot of sense why it would be this basic. You got your heavy melee hitters, you got your thieves to steal, you've got your mages for magic. It's what you would expect really from a Dungeons and Dragons kind of system. Obviously later in Final Fantasy history, the system would go on to be more famous and would get some awesome jobs, but here we got the basics. Something cool about the jobs is that every character's certain job can only wear a certain type of armor and use only a certain type of weapon. For instance, warriors can wear big heavy armor while mages can wield staffs. It really adds a lot more uniqueness to each class. That's really what most of the gameplay centers around, is the jobs and optimizing your team in a certain way that works well with the jobs you have. There was a couple really unbalanced jobs, I will add. Some of them are just total shit. The first couple classes you get in the game are fine, but some of the later ones you'll just immediately be like, why would I ever use this? This is crap. Oh, and a big deal for the time was that you automatically move to the next enemy in battle when you kill the enemy that was originally targeted. This doesn't sound like a big deal, but trust me, it is. Automatically moving to the enemy that is alive for you to attack as opposed to attacking a dead corpse is a big deal. If you are battling or sitting to the menus deciding how you want your jobs to work, you're probably, if you're not battling or doing the jobs, you're probably exploring around the world. You explore around the fairly large overworld with a few vehicles in the game, finding hidden chests and just fighting monsters and trying to get through the game. It's a pretty open overworld, to be honest, but there is a lot of locked areas that you need a certain vehicle to get into later. It's pretty standard RPG stuff, and if you know really anything about role-playing games, you'll be very familiar with this entire setup. If not, I would not recommend you start with this game. This game is hard, but I'll talk about the difficulty in a later part. So let's move on to those graphics. Now the graphics are the DS game's graphics, so I'm going to treat this game like a DS game, and I think the game looks fine. Obviously it's pretty blurry and some of the textures look outdated, but I think this game looks a hell of a lot better than the NES version, that's for sure. The models are decent enough for the DS, the frame rate was fine, the user interface was at least pretty nice, and it was easy to navigate. I really don't have much to comment on because the game does actually look good for a DS game. Obviously it doesn't look great now for a PC game, but again, it's a DS game. I mean, I really think it looks fine. The complaining about the graphics is really just rudimentary at this point. So on to the sound. The sound in Final Fantasy III is pretty alright. There is no voice acting, but at least the dialogue is decent enough to read. The sound effects are all pretty standard and just pretty traditional, if I had to put it in one word. I mean, it gets the job done and it's fine, really. The music in Final Fantasy III, at first it was just alright to me, but it's actually grown on me. Some tracks are actually really good in the game, and I will say they are really nice. I will say, though, there are a couple songs that I think are just super boring and get really repetitive, to be honest. Like, I got pretty sick of some of these. The battle theme I thought was alright. It wasn't, like, amazing, but it was still alright. I didn't think it was just amazing. The boss theme I thought was actually pretty good, and I thought it was a lot better. It was a lot catchier, that's for sure. The mellow music in this game is like wonderful. That is one aspect of the music that has really grown on me since I played the game. I think that it's actually really good. The music overall, I think at first when I listened to it, I thought it was just okay, but after listening a lot more to it, I think it's actually really quite good. I mean, I really don't have that much to say with it because I think only a certain portion of the tracks resonate with me, but I still think it was not bad. But again, it was just kind of traditional. Same thing as the sound effects. But now that I'm done talking about the things in Final Fantasy III that are alright, it's time to talk about the things that are objectively bad. Okay, so this game is hard, and it's not one of those, one kind of hard. It's actually two kinds of hard. It's the hard in the sense that the game is actually difficult, and it's hard in the sense that you don't know where the fuck you're supposed to go. This is literally as old school of an RPG as it gets, like extremely old school. That means lots of wandering around, trying to figure out what the hell to do, to the point of like parody, really. You're just going to be wandering around, clicking on everything, talking to everyone, investigating every area. It's going to take you a long ass time to get anywhere in this game if you don't have a guide. I had a guide like 90-95% of the game because there is just way too much walking around, doing nothing, trying to figure out what the fuck to do next for my liking, and I don't got time for that. If you do not have a guide, good luck figuring out some of this shit. Also, this game is a shit ton of grinding. Like, we're talking hours upon hours of grinding. It's very old school in that sense. I spent a good 20 to 25% of my game just grinding to be a high enough level to have enough health to survive a boss hit. The amount of grinding that you have to do in this game is some of the most grinding I've ever done in any video game. I am not exaggerating. I got real sick of it. After my 5th or 6th hour of it, I was just like, I am done. And I mean, this was okay back then because it was pretty standard, but that is not a good excuse at all anymore. I mean, it still means I can't like it because I don't. The last area in the game in particular is just ridiculous with the amount of grinding you need. If you do not do this grinding, there is no way you're going to be able to even come close to the final boss, because these dungeons are hard. Speaking of that, they want you to go through these dungeons in pretty much one go, including the boss. That's just really hard, and the bottom line is grinding. Lots and lots of grinding. There's just no way around it. Lots of grinding. But then this leads me to my next issue, which is the random factor. What do I mean by this? The criticals that are there, like, there are so many times where you'll be hit by an enemy and it says critical. It's totally random. Other games like Pokemon do this, and it's fucking annoying in this game. Like, there's probably over 30 times in this game that I was playing where I just got completely fucked because of a critical. Like, it doesn't matter how much grinding you do, you will just die if it's a critical from a boss. Like, you just have little to no chance at all to live. It's completely unfair, and it's just really annoying. The criticals are so fucking annoying. Like, that's the most random part of the game. You could be having a good ass run against a boss, then all of a sudden, critical, and you're screwed. It's just like totally unfair. It comes out of nowhere, and it's just a random factor that pisses me off, and it really just takes control away from the player. Next is just this whole turn-based bullshit. What I mean by this is, it's not like once you choose your commands, like it's your turn to attack and then it's theirs. No, it's based on some random speed determination. Sometimes you'll go before the enemy, sometimes they go, but usually what it'll be is one or two of your party members, usually almost at random, will go, and then the enemies attack, and then the rest of the party members go. It's completely random, and it's borderline infuriating sometimes, especially when you have key items being used like Phoenix Down, and then the ally you thought that was going to go on your party doesn't end up going until later. Like, it's just so annoying. I really wish it was just more standard, like Pokemon, where it's like, you go, enemy goes. That would have been much better, but that's not the case. And yes, of course, I know the game is old, but it still sucks in those aspects. And ultimately, the game just ended up feeling pretty repetitive, especially with the ending random encounters that got obnoxious. But if you don't do these random encounters and grinding, you will be screwed. You will lose. Despite all these issues, though, what do I really think of the game? The game's alright. I mean, it's not great, or even in my top 20, top 30 RPGs, but the game is still okay. Despite its issues, it still is a decent enough experience. I still had a bit of fun with it. Do I recommend this over, like, any other Final Fantasy? No. Like, would I put every other mainline Final Fantasy game like before this one, except for the original two, which are even harder to go back to? Yeah, I'd do that. I'd actually recommend you any other mainline Final Fantasy game over Final Fantasy 3, except for the first two. The game's not bad. No. It's just aged a lot, and it just feels repetitive in many aspects and way too archaic for its own good. It's just extremely traditional. I know some people love the traditional RPGs like Ultima, Wasteland, or Dungeons and Dragons, but me personally, I'm just not that big of a nerd. Okay, I kid. But what I'm saying is that I'm just not a huge fan of the setting, the world, or just traditionalists. That includes the gameplay. The story is very generic. The world is very generic. It did introduce the Moogles and Chocobos, though. The gameplay is generic. It's not bad, it gets the job done, but it doesn't do anything more than that. It was an interesting playthrough, and I gotta say it was pretty interesting because it was a very rude awakening to me as someone who plays really just modern RPGs. I'm glad I experienced it. I know what this almost black sheep, it seems, of Final Fantasy, like the original kind of games are. I did experience it. I recommend it as if you like RPGs and you want to play something more traditional, but really you could play any other Final Fantasy after this one, and I think you'd have a better time because there's just not as much grinding. Bottom line, good game. So have a nice day, guys.